Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. I am your host, Mr. Kurt Wilkert Jr., rocking live from sunny South Florida, where it is all the things you expect. About 80 degrees and breezy and mostly sunny. So pretty good day to be around here. But we are going to be having a very special guest today. One of the first Bitcoin developers, arguably Satoshi Nakamoto's first friend. And we'll be talking about history of Bitcoin, the history of the internet, and also I want to get into like the future of the internet and how to move forward. I'm very much the historian. I like the history myself, but I think once we get some of the fun stuff out of the way, I really want to get the view of the future from somebody who is a futurist and has been working on really cool stuff since Bitcoin 2. So, ladies and gentlemen, it'll be Mr. Mike Hearn. So please prepare your questions, comments, and whatever else you have. I would like to drill into some of the Satoshi saga stuff, the scaling war. So let's come up with some good stuff to discuss. I'm going to have my own biases to what we should talk about, but I'm sure somebody will say something in the comment box that makes me say, oh yeah, that's a fantastic question. So please help me out there, audience, and let your friends know that we will be live taking questions from the box. So it is Tuesday, which means also my latest article came out. I actually did kind of a quickie this week talking about how to send transactions over SMS using the new tool by Dan Wagner. Dan may be watching. So Dan, if you're watching, good stuff, really cool tool, nice onboarding tool for the Bitcoin ecosystem. And you should check did I pin it? I don't think I pinned it. Check my posts on X. It's one of my more recent posts. And you can read about how to SMS people some coins. And pardon me, we're also going to probably be going a little bit long today. So you're going to need to prepare yourselves, do a little breathing exercise, clear the head, hydrate, and all of that. Make sure you get your electrolytes because this one's going to be kind of a cracker, I have a feeling. So without any further ado, I got to thank the sponsors here. Thank you, Rock Wallet. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to have all the fun that we're having here. So Rock Wallet being the non-custodial solution for your Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, your Ethereum and stable coins, and a couple other things too. It is a completely non-custodial wallet, but it also offers in-wallet exchanging. You guys are great. Really good team too, just nice people. And I actually intend to be seeing some of them in Miami over the next few days here. And then also our friends from Champions TCG. The TCG team is really killer. Imagine tokenized coins and cards on Bitcoin. What a good time. So everybody, they are doing really cool stuff. They have been a fantastic sponsor as well. So please hit up our sponsors so they continue to sponsor the show and I get to have more fun with you and bring on some good guests. So we're going to play the Rock Wallet ad. I'm going to not strain my voice talking about my own nonsense, and we're going to come back in about 30 seconds with Mr. Mike Hearn. Where's the Rock Wallet ad? Did we lose him? All right, where's my producer? We may have lost him. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
All right, let's for anybody that doesn't know your backstory, the Wikipedia version, you're an engineer from Google and got into Bitcoin early and whatever, but how would you like your story told? What's the best way to introduce Mike Hearn in your opinion?
Do I actually have a Wikipedia page? I'm not sure I do. I don't think so. Well, I guess if I did, I guess what it would say is what you said. Basically, I got involved in all of this a long time ago in 2009 because I was very interested in internet money, and no one was. Basically, there were 20 people on the entire internet who were interested in this topic at that time. So we all found each other, and I found Ripple. This is before it was a company, of course, and then through Ripple, I found. Well, actually, I started at this Yahoo group about people who enjoyed talking about community currencies and things. And from that to Ripple, then from Ripple to Bitcoin. And then, I thought Bitcoin was cool and got involved and started developing for it. That's how I ended up here.
For those who don't know, and it's funny because Satoshi mentioned Ripple very early, may have even been in his first post.
I asked him.
Oh, okay. so what did Ripple look like circa 2008, 2009, for those who may not know?
Yeah, it was, and I think it still is, a fascinating idea. The original classical pre-XRP Ripple. It wasn't software you could download and run, really. It was a theoretical system at this time. And Ryan Fago, who created it, he posited this system where there was no money, actually, which is what blew my mind. I was like, how can you have an economy with no money? Right? That makes no sense.
Yeah.
And I emailed back and forth with him a lot, and he explained, he unconfused me about a lot of topics because I didn't really understand how money worked at that time. But he was really helpful, and what he proposed is a system where you could actually have like a social network, and you could mark yourself as being in debt to other people, and then they could mark themselves as in debt to even more people, and the Ripple system would find places where there were cycles in debt, basically. So you would actually find, if you took a $100 bill and passed it to around, eventually it would come back to you. Ripple could find those places or those cycles and cancel it out. So in theory, everyone in a well-balanced economy, eventually it all ends up, balancing out. So you would just have debt that appears and disappears. Denominated in whatever you want. It didn't have to be denominated in dollars or Bitcoins or any currency. You could denominate it in hours of your own work. So it was a fascinating idea to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. So getting into the early Bitcoin, it's funny because you see the first few people respond to Satoshi Nakamoto. I think the first guy was James Donald, and kind of gives everyone will need to run a node, and so it can't scale and that kind of thing. Obviously had a lot of critics. I think you were the first person to see it and say, yeah, that looks like a good idea, and actually started asking productive questions.
No, I think I should give credit here. That was Hal Finney. So I wasn't on the original mailing list where it was announced. I found out about it a few months later. And if you look at the original announcement thread, then everyone is dunking on him, basically. Everyone's like, I don't think this will work. And then Hal Finney is the first guy who steps up and says, this is actually very interesting. And Hal was interested because he had actually created his own digital currency as well. He was like one of the only people who had actually created their own internet money before Satoshi. His system was long since forgotten, but he created something that was very different to Bitcoin, but kind of similar in spirit.
Sure. What was your relationship with Hal? Did you have a closeness? Did you even talk to him, really? I don't recall any specific interactions between you two on the record.
We did interact before Bitcoin, actually. If you search, there's actually a theory out there someone wrote about saying that I'm Satoshi and I'm not. But one of the pieces of evidence was that I interacted with Hal before Bitcoin existed, because we were on a mailing list and I had an interest in a technology that he also had an interest in. And we just sort of exchanged emails related to that. And then later, of course, Hal and me show up in the same discussions again, but this time related to Bitcoin. And eventually these two threads intertwine, because actually the technology we were both interested in, I propose a project that uses it, and Hal makes it the last project he takes on before he dies. So we never met. We only ever interacted through public forums. But I knew his name for quite some years, and he knew mine.
So getting into your experience at Google, the story is, well, you're a software engineer, but there's a lot of ways to be a software engineer at Google, I'm sure. Can you get into what was it that you did there, and what have you done since too? I'd really like to know. It's been 10 years since you've been a pseudo public person, really. So I'd love to know where that's taken you, just so we kind of know what's the state of the union over there.
Yeah. I actually did three things at Google. For several years, I wasn't a software engineer at all there. I had been before I joined Google, but when I joined, they said, we have enough software engineers. What we really need are people who are going to be on call for our services and fix them when they break. And, so I got to be one of the guys who wakes up in the middle of the night to fix Google Maps when it broke. And I spent 3 or 4 years doing that. And that involved, writing some software, but mostly it was debugging. it was, this incredibly complicated system broke. Like, where did it break? Why did it break? How can I fix it as quickly as possible? Kind of work. And after that, I got tired of that eventually because I wanted to get my sleep and my weekends back. And so I switched to work on Gmail, and I did anti-spam on Gmail for a while, and then that sort of segued into bot detection. And Google still use the anti-bot system I designed today. It's still a core piece of their network protection system. So I did that, and I also did account security and things like that. And while I was there, I worked a bit on Bitcoin stuff, like in my spare time.
Yeah. When it comes to anti-spam and anti-bots, was that a correlative thing? I know proof of work was invented basically for that. Was there any correlation there, or is it just circumstantial?
No. So the system I'm talking about, the Google BotGuard system, it doesn't use proof of work. It kind of does, in that it proves that you ran a program inside a web browser, which is difficult to fake. So it's kind of asking you to do a calculation that's hard to forge. But it's not a hash-based calculation. It's not a pure proof of CPU work. Yeah, but there was no. The only thing that linked those two projects is that they both came out of really obscure interests, where everyone told me it was a waste of time, basically, because the BotGuard system is built on you create a JavaScript program and ask your spammer to run it. And so the conventional wisdom at the time was that this can never work because, well, the spammer will just reverse engineer the system. Right. And I thought, no, I'm not sure. I think, some of the techniques from the world of like DRM and video copy protection can be repurposed for anti-spam, which there's not an obvious connection between these two things. But I thought, I see a connection. And yeah, no one cares. It's like Bitcoin in the beginning. Nobody cared. And then I kind of like showed that it could work and pushed it through anyway. And after that, people were like, hey, this is great. So we'll adopt that. And yeah, like Bitcoin was in the beginning. Also, everyone was like, why are you interested in this? This is no relevance to anything.
Yeah, funny. So since Bitcoin, I know you spent a good amount of time at R3, the Corda project. Is that still what you're working on, or?
No, I left R3 some years ago. So I did Corda for about 5 years, I guess. And that was fascinating because it was the chance to take the ideas in Bitcoin and really elaborate them into my own system. I did most of the design work for Corda. And in a totally different context, right? Because in that project, we weren't trying to create a currency. It was like, can we use these ideas to help existing companies do what they currently do, but do it better? And so I met a whole lot of people I had not, the type of people I hadn't met before and the type of companies I hadn't worked with before. So that was really fascinating. And it was quite successful for a while. I left during COVID, and I created my own company, which is very humble. It sells developer tools, or a developer tool. And in the last year or so, I now work part-time. I still have my company and I still work on it, but I now work part-time for Oracle Labs as a researcher.
Okay, very cool. Any relationship with Ian Grigg ongoing? I know you two worked together quite a bit a number of years ago. Is he still?
He was there very briefly at the beginning of R3, but he left fairly soon. So I think I met him like once or something.
Oh, okay. Oh, I assumed you were a little closer than that.
No.
Okay.
He seems a nice guy.
He is. He's one that I've had the opportunity. He's been on my show and we've met a couple times as well. So
yeah.
Oh, cool. So getting into Bitcoin era stuff, I think if you just Google Mike Hearn, you're going to get probably one of three things. It'll be your fights with the small blockers. It'll be your farewell letter to Bitcoin, and then probably long trolling Reddit forums about what a fool you are is what I'm guessing will come up if Googled.
Don't forget the bodybuilder.
There you go. So when you think about Bitcoin and your initial response to it, like your questions to Satoshi showed a curiosity that I really appreciate. So they led to some of Satoshi's best responses. Is talking about we can scale faster than Visa with today's hardware, and some of these things that big blockers will quote these things, and they're out of context. Like, you may not realize that these are responses to your emails to him and things.
Yeah.
What is your, like, looking back now, 9-ish years after leaving the project, do you still feel like like, has your view about the technology changed in light of how the culture and things have changed around Bitcoin? Because I think the culture's changed drastically. Or the perception, like when people think about what is Bitcoin, most people aren't even asking these questions today. They want to hear about ETFs or what Michael Saylor is buying this week or whatever. But um, has your fundamental view, if you were to go back and put yourself in the shoes of 2009 Mike, do you still feel the same way about the basic questions about the technology, or have you sort of written it off, and do you not find the technology as compelling as perhaps you did?
I think the technology is still very interesting. I think it is still very compelling. I mean, I think what has changed, for me in the last 15 years is definitely, I have a deeper appreciation of the social side of these projects and how hard that is.
Yeah.
So, 2009 era Mike thought, if you solve the computer science of it, you can create internet money that's decentralized. Boom, done. It's like, oh, it's an open source project, loads of those out there. What's the complexity of that? And yeah, to 2025 era Mike is like, forget the computer science. That's the easy part. Yeah. The hard part is the social science, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Well, and I it's funny. I think that's absolutely true in that. And I actually went through a similar thing. I've discovered Bitcoin myself in sort of 2012 to 2013 is when I really got into it and was like, oh wow, this is great. Everybody's going to think this is great if they just could understand what's happening here.
Right.
And I came to realize, like, oh, people don't want to understand. They want to earn money, which in hindsight is a very obvious response.
Yeah.
People are
right.
people invest money in all kinds of crazy things because they think it's going to make them money quickly. But if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice, maybe before things got really toxic, and I think between you and some of the key, like your Gregory Maxwell types, I think you two in particular butted heads really hard. Do you think, what advice would you give yourself circa, that 2013, 14, 15 era that just got really, really bad? If you could just if you could do a redo on like one or two things, what would it be?
I guess I would have done two things. One is I would have pushed back a lot harder against this notion of like Bitcoin Core. Firstly, I came up with the name Bitcoin Core. That was a mistake. Like that sent all the wrong messages. It sounded good. I still think it sounds good as a name, but it sent all the wrong messages because it implied that this is like there's a singular unitary core, right? And what we should have done is like call it, I don't know, Bitcoin Alpha or something that like implied there can be others that are just as good. Because that was one of the sticking points that the community got like sort of stuck on, right? It was like, we can't have alternative implementations. We all have to use software from one website. And the second is, I would probably have tried to help out more with the foundation, which sort of went off the rails. I mean, I was involved. I did help out a bit, but I wasn't really, I was on my periphery. Because I think, if you have a somewhat formalized structure which brings together all the different stakeholders and provides, some structure around working out what people want, it's much less subject to being hijacked by random nobodies who are like using sock puppets and stuff. I don't know if those things would have worked. I don't know if they would have made a difference, but that's probably what I would, send back in time.
Well, that's kind of when you look at the culture, I think it's a jargon thing. It's the same reason normal people can't relate to like brain surgeons or heart surgeons. The same reason they can't relate really well to high level software developers is there's a certain amount that they understand, but there's the 95% of what they're actually doing that you kind of can't grapple with until you've done it. And I think that gets maliciously, probably isn't the exact right word, but I think it can be used maliciously in a lot of cases. You can see this with, surgeons or high-end lawyers, like they're hoity-toity, and that's a little bit part of the culture. And in the dev space, though, I think the difference is that they're creating. So it almost has this like wizardry, godlike aspect to, I can just have an idea, I can code it, and I can create my thing, and it just becomes this new extension of me. And so there's a little bit of I don't even know, like a magisterium to it that is a little hard to quantify. And I think that.
Well, that's good.
I just wanted to say that like it works to the favor of, well, we should just trust the core developers because ultimately the conversations that they're having are above my head. I can understand the first two arguments, but all the here's why it can't scale, and here's the sinking problem, and here, all these things that we got lost in, I think, in the scaling debate. Most people, I think, just felt unqualified to debate and then decided to just go with, I don't know, the majority seems like they feel this way, and I'm going to go that direction. Do you think there's a way around that from like a governance standpoint? Governance is another thing you've talked a lot about, especially in regards to the Bitcoin Foundation and things like that. Do you think that can be ushered in? Is that even possible at this point in the maybe even the whole blockchain space, or is it just a pipe dream?
Well, I mean, something like the Bitcoin Foundation absolutely could have worked, right? It kind of fell apart with the specifics of who signed up and who was involved early and so on. But such foundations, exist for a whole lot of projects, and they kind of often do help. It's interesting you're using words like, magic, magisterium, wizard, this kind of thing, right? What you saw in that debate was definitely two sides, and the small block side very much leaned into that, right? They were like, you cannot possibly understand what we do. It's far too wizardly. And people like Greg actually, leaned into this notion of wizards and magic and magic internet money and all this kind of stuff. And then, you had like the people like me and Gavin and so on who were saying like, no, it's just software. Yes, there's some skill involved in C++ and all this stuff, but it's not magic. You can understand it too. And we definitely didn't do it. I mean, given that it was a novel algorithm and so on, a lot of people did end up understanding it. But definitely something that struck me when I was talking to people in 2014, 2015, was how many people I met who thought they understood the blockchain algorithm but didn't. And I hit this problem again and again, where someone would be an enthusiast or even appear to be a developer and would be like arguing with me about something, and then I would, say something. Like I would realize they had a very slightly incorrect understanding of what the algorithm was doing in certain cases, and that was one of the things that was leading them to, to sort of argue with me about stuff. And that was tough, and I wasn't sure what to do about that, because like by this point, lots of people had learned about Bitcoin, and they were going to conferences for years, and it's very hard at that point to correct misunderstandings and things. Also, some of these issues are just very subtle, but they were understandable. So I spent my time writing blog posts and things, or some of my time writing blog posts to try and demystify some of this.
No, and actually, some of that content is really, really good. I re-referenced your hard forks versus soft forks blog post when they were talking when the Taproot conversation was happening in Bitcoin, and then now there's a debate happening now about re-enabling OpCat and how, like, is that possible? And here are the risks and all these things, and everyone's, wow, here's how you fork it and all that. And I'm very much, I don't like the concept of a soft fork for a lot of the reasons that you elucidated, in that my position is that they're essentially lying to legacy nodes. Like, legacy nodes are just in a permanent state of trust me, bro, from then forward. And I make these arguments, and it's funny. I had somebody on X tell me today, like, oh, you just don't understand. And so I still see the exact same sort of toxic, recursive, stupid debate tactics there. But I think the thing that stands out too is you're always very real world and very practical about, hey, you know what? Tokens are going to be regulated, and if it's an illegal security, that's going to be a problem, and you should just issue it in a way that is fair for reasons of X, and I think you always had a very sort of a business mind, where almost everybody else involved had much more of a sort of scientist, cypherpunk, or a deeply political slant. I think those were the two things that are primary to Bitcoin culture, especially a decade ago. But you had a much more like business cast and a little more of a practical sort of view of, hey, here are some business ideas for people that might want to use the technology. Do you think that might have been a key reason why maybe you were targeted, or maybe why you and the cypherpunk contingent failed to come to an accord on much? Is it a worldview thing?
I don't really think it was a worldview thing. I mean, I think there was definitely a massive shortage of people who had the necessary background to do something like Bitcoin in that project. Like, if you looked around, if you looked around and said, who's of the developers, has anyone ever ran or has anyone run a large service that handles a lot of traffic? And that was like me and no one else, basically.
Right.
So, you had a few developers like, Jeff had done some work on the Linux kernel, and Gavin had done some work on, VR in your browser in the 90s, and I'm sure other things too. But the basics of, we have a service, it's to be taken seriously, it's going to be critical, right? If it goes down, people can't buy and sell things for their businesses and food and all that. It's got to work. And I've been on call for Google Maps for years, and on call for systems where if you break them, then you lose $1 million a minute. It's crazy. And so a lot of the things that I was saying, I felt were kind of obvious, but they weren't obvious to everyone. And in particular, I think the worldview difference was, most people were like, the tech is easy. We don't really have to worry too much. Like the hard part is the ideas and the wizardly thinking. And I'm like, no, forget that. The hard part is just keeping this, thing from derailing. Because it means the hard part is like constantly fixing all of these little problems that aren't sexy or clever to work on, but it just takes a ton of work. And that, I think, that message didn't really get through. So like a lot of the stuff I wrote about, some of it, in the later years was more about governance and social stuff and all these problems. But in the earlier years, I was like, things like denial of service attacks are a problem, not only the ones that are being discussed, but more basic ones. Or yes, it can scale Virginia. Computers are fast, and we can optimize, and you can distribute nodes over multiple machines if you need to, and a lot of stuff that was kind of basic for that time, but people in that community hadn't been exposed to it. Because also, and the other problem was a lot of them were students, actually.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting one. Is a lot of people were they're working on their doctorates, or like these are the kind of people that have extra time to play with a new project, right? And so it's like, oh, cool. If I do something novel, maybe I can add this to my PhD thesis, and that'll be cool.
Yeah.
And so even like your Adam Back and stuff, like when he, initially talking about block size upgrades, I think he was in favor of doubling the block size for, I don't even know, a 3-4 year period or something, up to 8 megabytes or something like that. Like, he seemed very amenable conceptually until all of a sudden it was actually at the door, and then the culture shifted to, here's all the reasons this would be dangerous. Now, I've theorized that might have something to do with like venture capital money and some of these other things. It all seemed very convenient that the Blockstream pitch deck was being shuffled around at the same time there's a big narrative shift. But that's me. Well, if you ask them, it's me being a conspiracy theorist. But what do you think the role of big money, big capital? Some of your early investments from like CME Ventures or MasterCard Ventures, or some of these things. Do you think they wanted to keep Bitcoin in a bottle so that they could catch up, make their own blockchain patent fortresses, or those kind of things, or is that all? Am I crazy? What do you think?
I don't think the investors had any kind of plan in that way, if that's what you mean. I think they just were like, this is cool. We've got, this is during the ZERP era, so there's just money everywhere. There's like, this is cool, there's things happening, let's spray money. I think, the Blockstream guys, it's very hard. I still don't know today, whether the chicken or the egg, which came first, because some of them have been, before Blockstream existed, they've been making kind of small block type arguments. But then at the same time, others who had not been got hired, right? And then suddenly the money is there as long as they agree with their new boss. And so the money leads to their position, which leads to the money, which leads to their position. It's sort of circular, right? I don't know if you can disentangle these things. Certainly, an environment where you can create a business where you're like, I have no idea how we're going to make money. We're just going to fund Bitcoin core development, and then people give you money. That's enabling for all kinds of very academic, disconnected from reality kind of thinking and actions. So yes, one of the things that I think would have been, we should have focused on much earlier is this notion of like companies making Bitcoin implementations and selling them instead of it all being open source, right? Like there was a decentralized system does not require all the software to be open source, but we acted as if it did.
Sure. Well, it's funny. So I run a mining pool, and that's been one of our major ethos things too, is that, hey, we'll take the reference client and we will optimize it for whatever our commercial goals are. Like, that just seems like a very obvious step. and something I've theorized that your major pools are probably doing anyways and just not talking about because, drama.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they are. I'm sure lots of people take that code and modify it. That's absolutely fine. I mean, I think we could have pushed harder on re-implementations from scratch, right? And said like, oh yeah, there's no reason everyone has to run Bitcoin Core, and there needs to be a process and a group structure where different implementations can coordinate on changes. And we should have set up that like competing market of implementations earlier.
Sure. So looking at the way that stuff went, I always think of three guys, and it's you, Gavin, and Jeff seem like the voice of reason on the big block side. And you guys didn't agree on everything either, but I think looking at Gavin without criticizing him, because I don't want to criticize him. I like Gavin as a person, but I think his personality was a little too soft to be in the role he was in, to kind of be that lead developer role. And I think he was easier to bully than perhaps Satoshi would have assumed or whatever. And you were always a little more like very willing to just come in and fight. Whereas I think Gavin was a little bit more of a take a step back, try to be a peacemaker, try to come to some sort of social consensus. Whereas I always, your responses actually always crack me up when I read long forum responses, always, because you tend to say what I'm thinking in that, like, all right, this guy's a jerk, this guy's a jerk, this guy's a jerk. And then you would pop in and say, hey, you guys are all being jerks. And I'd be like, okay, thank God, But Gavin never really had that attitude. Do you think things would have been different if, I don't know, and I don't want to put you in the, like, if you were the lead developer, Mike, but if somebody else who had a little bit more of a, maybe just managerial experience even, but someone that was a little more terse or a little more stern or had experience working with kind of a rabble, do you think things could have gone differently?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know. If you look at the open source projects that have succeeded over the long run, the people who run them do tend to be pretty, they often struggle to balance, being aggressive and just laying down the law and, being the sort of community builder type, right? The most obvious example of that is the Linux kernel, where, Linus is, sometimes been very much like flaming people in public, and other times he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm too, bolshy. And it's just really hard. And I don't, at the moment, he's actually getting flamed for the opposite reason. He's being, some people are saying, oh, he's not, he needs to step up and provide leadership over rust in the kernel, and he's just letting his lieutenants fight about it. So it's, leadership and culture and institutional design is like a way harder problem than I think any of us appreciated back then, right? And yeah, the difference between projects that work and projects that don't can boil down to very random quirks of individual personalities. For example, most obviously, if Elon Musk was not who he was, there would not be rockets that land themselves, right? No one else managed that. No one else thought it was possible. That's just like if he had died in a car crash 20 years ago, it just would never have happened. So, I mean, I think what I would have done differently is, I would have said, right, Bitcoin Core has one maintainer. If Satoshi put me in charge, I would have said that would have been me. Please fork, right? If you disagree, the fork button is right there on GitHub. But like, go set yourself up as an alternative maintainer, and we will like work through the issues of compatibility and bug for bug compatibility, and then I just said, right, Bitcoin.org is going to point people towards different implementations and things. I understand why Gavin kind of panicked and were like, I'm just going to add a bunch of people to the repository with no clear structure, because that was very quick and easy to do. But it's not what I would have done.
Yeah. To that point, I think Satoshi, it's funny when you see Satoshi early, he strikes me as this sort of hopeful, futurist, optimist type. He's got this very patient and seemingly very systematically thought through. It's almost like he figured the questions that would come, like he kind of already had prepared for. But then later Satoshi, you're sort of 2010 into 2012, which I think 2011, 2012, he didn't talk much to anybody anyways, but he seemed very short, consistently a little grumpier, and his last farewell, so sort of talking about like, okay, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, like, hey, maybe we should stop talking about pirate currency or whatever. And, hey, thank your devs for doing a good job, but peace out was kind of the exit, which is a little bit of a like, okay, that wasn't a grand exit. But I've always sort of read that as kind of a deep frustration. And I'm wondering if you read that the same way, or if you had any thoughts on maybe where Satoshi's head was at or where his emotions might have been when he sort of bowed out of the project.
Well, I mean, obviously we don't know anything about what was going on in his real life. I understand that kind of frustration, right? I mean, when the most enjoyable time in any project almost is when you're on your own and you're like laying down the beginnings and dreaming about what could be. And then, other people turn up and other people can be difficult to work with and, disagree on things, especially in a project as expansive as Bitcoin with such open goals. And yeah, you could see that, like, I don't get the sense, for example, when I was interacting with Satoshi, that he was a sort of gold bug, a kind of hyper enthusiastic Bitcoin Jesus kind of figure, right? He definitely wasn't. He was just sort of like, I'm going to experiment and see if people like what I built. And then, these very like evangelical people arrived and were like, oh, this is going to change the whole world. And yeah, a lot of personalities kind of don't want to be at the center of that, right?
Sure.
So I kind of understand. I mean, I backed out too. I was like, peace out, guys. I'm out.
Yeah.
So I do understand why he might have made that decision. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I've always gotten that notion too. Is you get the people who say, oh, very obviously it's digital gold. He must be this big, Hayek Mises guy. And I also never really got that vibe from him. He seems very interested in payments to me more than anything, but then also sort of novel use of the system for other bigger ideas, mostly unstated, but he seemed to imply several times that, and then there's the other thing, like the big idea is to be revealed, but it kind of never happened. But did you have any sense of what else he may have cared about? Because I read into it myself. I always liked the idea of bootstrapping a new internet or having optional public-private identity protocols or these kind of things where we can sort of disrupt the old world in novel ways. But, most people say, well, I think that's silly. But did you get any sense, or did you ever have a private conversation, maybe that hasn't been revealed or anything, but of those kind of bigger ideas, did he ever give you anything like that, hey, I really hope we can get to X?
Yeah, we did have a private conversation, but it didn't have anything like that in it. It was just like, I kept that one private so I could authenticate him if I ever meet him, basically. But he didn't say anything of interest to the community, so that's okay. I mean, so the white paper is quite conservative, right? And then in his messages, he was a little bit more, futurist and evangelical, but not a huge amount. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there was like a really big thing. I mean, he was interested in building applications on top of the protocol and smart contracts, right? That was kind of like the big thing that I think he wanted to explore next. Beyond that, I don't think so. I mean, what were you thinking of when you said he had a?
He talks about like bootstrapping tokens, like the kind of stuff that seems very trivial today because everybody does them. But he talked about creating secondary tokens that you could drop into, I think he specifically said, use in an adult site for extra privacy or some of these other things. Like,
I mean, I think a lot of this, these discussions came out of people asking, what can we do with these contract features, or how can we achieve X or Y? And then, he would go away and think about it and come back with like, well, actually, you can use the protocol in this clever way. I don't think he cared all that much about any individual use case or application beyond payments. But yeah, if other people asked, he was happy to explain how to do it.
Yeah. You were mentioned quite a bit in the Hijacking Bitcoin book. Have you read the book?
Yeah.
Okay. What was your take on the book in general?
I think it's good the book exists. I mean, I felt it was pretty good. I agreed with most of what was in it. I suppose it should be obvious. Yeah. I felt like it was very much, I wasn't sure what would happen if I gave it to someone who, well, actually, I am sure what would happen, because I actually asked for it for Christmas from my parents, and then it turned out my dad read it before he like wrapped it. So
oh, funny.
He wanted to know what was going on, and he was never, my parents had never really, dug into Bitcoin deeply. They don't really know that much about it. So that was interesting that he read it. I felt it was quite like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, right? It didn't really like build a wider narrative, I felt. It was very much a historical retelling of events, and then a kind of like, Edward Gibbon, the rise and fall of the Bitcoin empire, the decline and fall of the Bitcoin empire would be a different kind of book, right? And there's probably scope for, well, there are so many books on Bitcoin right now, actually, but there's probably a scope for a more magisterial take on events, right?
Yeah. So in that, I mean, actually, I thought it was quite a good book because I think it was really fair. I think it was not emotionally written, and I think you'd have to be pretty hard line on one side or the other to say it was unfair in some way. But it also played a little bit like a Bitcoin Cash commercial, which to me, doesn't like it. I think it took away from it a little bit. But I'm curious. How much have you followed sort of the big blocker fork stuff that's happened, like your Bitcoin Cash, your BSV, and sort of like, hey, here's the broader stuff, like what Bitcoin is capable of. Have you kept up on much of that, or is it outside of your interest at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of questions in the live chat asking something similar, right?
Yeah.
I haven't kept up with it that much. If you were to ask me about the ins and outs of what's happened in the last few years, I'd be like, I don't follow that stuff anymore, right? When I decided I was done with Bitcoin, I was like done. Now, every so often, people email me with questions or, ask me to do something like this. And so, I'm still willing to talk to people about it, right? There's a documentary coming out in the next few weeks, I think, even in the UK, which, I did some filming for. But I don't follow it closely. I know the basic outlines. I know what Bitcoin Cash is and BSV and this stuff, right? But I don't follow things closely.
Okay. Do you think there's a room for there to be like a Bitcoin style, money system, or has that sailed because of how much the brand has been sort of confused and muddled? And I think there's two ways to take it. You could say, oh, blockchain is still a great technology. Somebody might create something really useful with it, but Bitcoin is now, it's just this investment thesis, like just buy, MicroStrategy stock if you want to play that game. But do you think there can be a Bitcoin style cash that wins the game, or where do you think we go from here?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a lot over the years. People ask me this quite often too. It's really hard to see how the Bitcoin brand itself actually takes off again as real money. It could happen though, and the brand is so well known. I guess if any of these coins take off, it would be something that has the word Bitcoin in it. It might be Bitcoin Cash or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. That said, there have been places in the world where there's been a ton of pressure to use it, like in Argentina, right, with the inflation, and a bunch of places where we used to say, oh, Bitcoin would be useful in these places, and it would have been, but it still didn't take off. And I think just the difficulty of people like working out, oh, I bought the wrong kind of Bitcoin and now I can't send it with my wallet and stuff. That makes it really hard. So at this point, I'm tempted to say it would need a total reset around. And probably if you toss the Bitcoin brand, you probably also toss the protocol, because we know how to build better versions of it these days, I think.
Yeah.
One idea I did explore a few years ago, just in private, was the idea of a Ripple style, like getting rid of money as a concept. So in that system, you would have a basket of stocks, like shares on the markets, or basket of assets. And when you want to buy something from someone, you're actually like trading these, you're going out and doing market operations to trade these in order to eventually end up selling some things that this guy wants over here. And there is no currency involved at any point, or if there is, it's only an intermediary. And that's sort of a pretty radical idea, because it means you don't have prices anymore, which means you can't have like menus in restaurants with prices on and things. So you kind of end up needing almost like AR, you have to be able to hold up a phone and see your phone has to work out in real time what something would cost, and it's specific to you. So you can think of like more radical ideas like that, which might one day take off. But yeah, just the existing Bitcoin protocol and brand, is so confused now.
Yeah. Well, especially, I mean, there's, I don't even know, 20,000 blockchain tokens and coins and all this stuff. And it's, they're all essentially variations on like 3 or 4 ideas. So it's a weird place.
Well, and then the whole meme coin thing means that a lot of people just think it's just a joke. They're like, oh yeah, coins. So those are those joke things that it's basically just gambling, right? So to convince people, no, you can buy your groceries with these. That's very much an uphill battle now.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, it's been muddied too. In 2008, there wasn't Venmo and Zelle and all these other, I mean, there's centralized payments are actually quite good now, where Satoshi was trying to solve a problem of simple payments between people, because I think he had at the time credit cards or PayPal, at least in the US. So
absolutely. The existing systems have got a lot better. And when I was still taking part in the project, I sent an email at one point to the Bitcoin list, and I was like, hey, I asked for one of the very first contactless credit cards, and I got one from my bank and tried it out, and I was like, this is actually a really good user experience. And it's fast.
It is.
We need to like make something as fast as that to be competitive. And no one understood, right? They were like, what do you mean competition? Right? We were just like, of course Bitcoin will take over the world. What are you saying, that credit cards might be competitive? Are you a traitor? And I was like, yeah, it's just like most people don't care. They just want to use something that's fast and easy,
Yeah, no, it's very true. Like we're such a weird insular group of people. Even now, there's probably 100 times more people involved in Bitcoin in the last 10, maybe more. But the quality of understanding and what's even happening, I mean, most people are just holding coins on either Coinbase or some other vehicle. It's just a chart to them, and almost nothing else. But it's funny. I got a DM in the middle of this conversation from a guy named Andy, who created the Bitcoin XT subreddit when that was a thing. He said he wanted me to know that Gregory Maxwell now pulled some strings at Reddit and controls that subreddit.
Oh, really?
As of the last year or so. So
that's crazy.
Thank you, Greg. But
what kind of strings do you pull at Reddit to take over someone else's subreddit?
I have no idea. I think he knows everybody at Reddit. But
that site is such a joke. Incredible.
It is. But he's wondering if when there was that period, he says like 20,000 people joined in the first couple of days over on that hub. There was a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
What do you think actually happened? Like the rug pull on that stuff? Like, you were DDoS attacked. Well, it's speculated it was you. Your whole ISP got DDoS attacked and taken offline, and a bunch of these things. I think you used the word terrorism in describing what happened there. I may be recalling.
I don't remember.
That might be me. It may have been me that said that or thought it. But,
that could be.
But
it wasn't me whose ISP got taken offline. It was some guy in New York. But yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of people. I mean, I think so. One of the interesting things, one of the interesting conversations I had in the early days of designing Corda was with people who worked at Barclays Bank. And they were like, yeah, okay, so these algorithms are cool and it's a nice design, but like, who's going to set up the network? And I was like, oh, well, we've got this we've got this network, and it's going to be a peer-to-peer network on the internet. And they're like, no way, right? Who's going to set up the physical network with like the cables? And who's going to arrange fiber links? And they were like, we're not running anything on the public internet. That's insane, right? That would be like DDoS madness. We need a dedicated links, which is of course how banking currently works, which is why you can't DDoS a bank website and shut down a payment system in a country. I think what the whole XT events revealed is just how thin ice Bitcoin was skating on was, because anyone could have done that at any moment, right? And it didn't have to be internal fighting. It could have been someone external who just shuts down the Bitcoin community and says, hey, when I turn it off, I'm going to expect to have a lot of coins in this, in this address. Otherwise, I turn off the peer-to-peer network. And there was no real defense against that at that time, right? This is again one of those things where if there had been a strong foundation, a foundation organization that was strong and well run and competent, then they could have done things like set up dedicated links between exchanges, and they could have started building out a core network that wasn't the public internet. And that would have made things look very different. But yeah, it just wasn't done.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, well, of course, a lot of people don't understand how money actually works from a technology standpoint. Like the way that, you got like your M1 computer control box that's connected to the central bank and has a hotline to JP Morgan Chase. And, the way that these things work is very weird, actually, when you hear how directly connected and direct fiber and, the way this stuff is set up. And the fact that Bitcoin, and actually almost any I don't know that any blockchain has that kind of infrastructure in mind at all for uptime, and which is why even Solana claims to be super scalable, and it's gone just completely offline like 8 or 9 times at this point, because there's still that that basic ethos of, well, everything's got to be distributed, there needs to be no central point of failure, but it makes the whole system ultimately pretty fragile. Do you think that'll ever get there, or is it just? I mean, I feel like the culture is essentially just about novelty at this point, like just novelty and making money in weird ways. So is there a way forward? You've mentioned Ripple a couple of times. I think they tend to have a little more of a, hey, let's focus on professionalization, but they barely hit 80 transactions a second before Ripple was going offline in the last couple of weeks too, and that's like a big disappointment, right?
Yeah, I mean, the existing financial system is an evolved system, so it's very complex, but it's got a kind of evolved robustness to it, right? It's the systems that have survived over time, so it's selected for survival. Before I turned up and started working on Bitcoin, like I mentioned, right, I spent a lot of time talking with Ryan Fugger. Well, I watched a bunch of like videos and documentaries and things back in the days when there was no YouTube, so that meant I mail ordered DVDs and watched them on like how the financial system works. And then those documentaries were totally wrong, and there were no comment sections or anything on DVDs, so I didn't know that. And then Ryan was like, no, you're talking a lot of rubbish, here's how it really works. And then I went to work with I didn't work for banks, but with a bunch of banks and financial institutions, and then they told me a lot more as well. So that left me with a much greater appreciation of the work that gets done in the existing financial system, right? Like a lot of Bitcoiners are very dismissive of it. I was too a little bit in the beginning, not as much as the rest, right? I was like, yeah, we've got to compete with, the credit card guys are not stupid, right? Visa is well run, it's scalable, it's good tech and all that. And so I definitely have become a lot more technologically conservative, things like, so I think any future take on payments will probably evolve out of the current system in some way. It probably won't be a Bitcoin style, let's start from zero and rebuild everything from scratch, right? Because like, why does Bitcoin run over the internet? Well, it's cheap, right? Everyone has an internet connection. Why does banking not run over the internet? Well, because they're willing to pay a ton of money to, have that reliability and robustness. And banks have spent a lot of time on that over the time. You wouldn't, if you try to convince the Bitcoin community to upgrade to the level of costs that banks take on, that would be very hard.
Yeah, it's crazy. Have you looked much into some of the CBDC programs? Like some of them are blockchain based, but others are totally different technology, FedNow and some of these bigger ones. Do you think?
Sure, yeah.
Do you think that's a direction that things are going to make, or is it right now? I think it's too scattered to say what direction anybody's actually going.
Yeah,
what do you think?
CBDCs was some of the last things I worked on at R3 before leaving, actually. And it's a very difficult topic to talk about because there's basically two kinds. And a lot of the discussion you'll find on the internet is fixated on what they call retail CBDC, which is basically like central banks saying paper money and metal coins are a pain. Can we replace it with some new financial system? And blockchain is cool, so let's make it a blockchain-based system. Yeah. And that's really hard. I actually, I had to kind of deliver a reality check to some people who were working at central banks when I was at R3, because they'd say, yeah, we're going to do this and that. And I was like, no, okay, so already in step one, you're violating anti-money laundering laws. So you better, you guys are not hoodie-wearing hackers who can vanish at will, right? So you have to think about that. But then there's the second kind, which is the, I've forgotten what they called it, like institutional CDBC or something, which is
sure.
where
Intra-bank stuff, presumably.
Well, I mean, banks already have systems for this; they don't need it. But the goal of that was to push it out to businesses. So if you're a business, you could move hard money around between companies without going through banks. So it was basically, allowing people to be allowing companies to be their own bank. It's the same vision as Bitcoin, right? Hence the blockchain connection. And that was way more feasible and also useful. But to make that really useful for people, it wasn't enough to move money around. That was one of the core insights that we had at R3 and put into the design. You've got to be able to update. The benefit actually comes when you can move money and atomically update some other database in one transaction. So either the money moves and the asset is updated to have you as a new owner, or neither happen, but you can't have the money moves and then the asset isn't updated, or the asset is updated and the money doesn't move. That's when you get rec failures, and that's a big driver of cost in business. So Corda was designed to allow you to do that by saying, I have 5 different things in this database, only 4 of which, one of which is money, and the other 4 of which are invoice tracking or updating the state of a loan or whatever. And then you could update all of them at once. Now, I don't keep track of CDBC projects anymore, but that was kind of the thing we were working on.
Yeah. What do you think of the sort of Web3 stuff? This idea of internet on the blockchain, or some of these other metaverse and some of these other GameFi stuff. Again, these are over the last 5 years. I think people looking for, okay, how can we actually make this stuff useful or valuable? I think they're some of the only actual genuine attempts at building real businesses on blockchains. But do you think, what do you think of them conceptually? And where do you think that kind of thing is going, if anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about people putting the metaverse on the blockchain, but I can imagine that people have tried, because there's clearly been it reminds me of these old video games, like the Escape from Monkey Island or Day of the Tentacle, where you'd have this big pile of objects and then you've got a puzzle and you're like, maybe if I try the bucket with the broom, maybe something happens. So you just try combining random things together to see if that unlocks the next stage. And some of the Ethereum-based stuff sometimes reminded me of that. Now, like I said, that there's absolutely use cases for this kind of stuff. And we, in R3, we had this huge pile of use cases and all kinds of different customers coming and being interested in things, but they were pretty dry, right? They weren't cool, I'm going to do metaverse or I'm going to do games. They were we've got this paper-based process and we want to digitize it in a way that, doesn't create a new centralized middleman, and can you help? Corda had in common with Ethereum this notion it had multiple applications running on one system, and they could interact and move money around as part of their operations and stuff. So that definitely useful things you could do that. But the enterprise blockchain space has a whole other set of difficulties, that are different to the public space.
Yeah, it's funny hearing about paper processes. I gave a presentation to I forget what they were called, but it was some consortium of paper check writing companies. And they were explaining how they receive them, they mail to some central place, and they get scanned into a mainframe from the early 80s and processed. And this is still what's going on. And I explained to them how, in theory, you could have at the point of sale, that check becomes a token that is then transferred, and hey, here's how you could use the blockchain to speed your stuff up by 99.9%. And they enjoyed the presentation, and then basically said, well, if you can find a developer that could make it interact with the mainframe, maybe we could have that discussion, which was ooh, okay. What happens when your last developer dies? Is the company gone? Or it's very interesting.
Yeah, even when they're not mainframe, even when it's not legacy tech, right? It's a lot of times, a lot of these things stay very old or paper-based, and there's still a remarkable amount of just paper-based processes out there.
For sure.
Because digitizing it would create a middleman, a centralized system who would then have all the participants by the goodies, right? So they prefer to stick with paper because paper is decentralized. and like their preference for decentralization is so strong that they would rather just like not upgrade to digitized processes. And they kind of know this is silly, but at the same time, it's like, oh, we can keep putting it off a few more years, right? Like in trade finance, the way they decide if a document is legit is there are just teams of people in banks who are like holding the things up and examining the kind of paper they're on, and like trying to work out, is this a legit document issued by some bank the other side of the world? And obviously, you look at this and think, oh, it should be digitized. But then the question is, who runs it?
By who? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Digitized by who? So
funny.
Yeah.
So I see a comment here from Siggy, who's a colleague of mine working on a project called Teranode, which is essentially a Bitcoin node, but all the processes are containerized out. So your script validation, all these things. And so the benchmarks on it in distributed consensus looks like 1 million transactions per second. And we're pretty excited about it. My company has been one of the testing operators of it. We're pretty pumped. Seems like a really cool thing. Would something like that happening and getting traction with some client somewhere, would something like that make you interested in blockchain or Bitcoin more generally again? If things were to start to actually pick up traction on that vision that you wanted to see, would that make you want to come back and do something? Or I'm not offering you a job necessarily. No. I'm curious if that would excite you.
Yeah, if there were like 1 million Bitcoin transactions a second and they were legit and that was reflecting real world payment usage, then then it would be like the world currency, right? So then, yeah, sure. At that point, I think, I don't know anything about Teranode, but obviously the way you can scale all of these kind of things is, you can horizontally scale them to some extent.
Yep.
So the question is, where are these 1 million transactions a second going to come from? When we were working on when I was working on Corda and leading that team, a very common thing that customers would say is, but does it scale? And they would set these arbitrary targets. They would like, we won't buy unless it can do 10,000 transactions per second, or they would make up some number. And when we'd dig in and be like, do you have 10,000 transactions per second in your use case? They'd be like, no, it's more like 20 a day, right? But we don't want to ever get into a position where a system doesn't scale, and because the scalability debate was so huge, they would sort of been like, it was also what we found is it was a way of deciding between competitors. So they would be like, oh, I don't really know how to evaluate the feature sets, but I can see which number is higher. So go have a race, guys. Whoever competes gets over the finishing line.
Kind of question, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we did a ton of optimization, and we could have kept scaling that design up very far. It was a Bitcoin style design, so it could scale. But at some point we just stopped and we're like, okay, this is enough to win these bake-offs. So we won't push it further.
It's interesting. What is something? So I think a lot of people didn't realize, because of the way that things went down, there's this presumption that Bitcoin doesn't scale fundamentally. That it's slow, expensive digital gold, and that's the the meme, right? But Bitcoin itself, as a basic design, you zoom out 30,000 feet and you realize, oh, this is actually a very novel way to do global level payments. Do you think that's one thing that I think obviously your big blocker is going to agree on? But is there anything else that you feel like has become a meme in Bitcoin that you wish you could just say, no, guys, Bitcoin is really great at this other thing too that is completely ignored? Is there a thing or two like that in your head?
You mean beyond it, scaling and things like that?
Or I mean, it can be related to scaling too, but any other thing about it, like what stuck out to you once you dug into it to say, oh wow, this is really great, and maybe nobody else thought it was?
Yeah, so the obvious one was the contracts. The thing is that there's nothing mentioned about programmable money or smart contracts in the white paper, right? Yeah. Like the first time there were 1 or 2 threads in the forum or something before, in the beginning, where people were just saying, I noticed this thing in the source code, what is this, basically? And then there were some ideas being kicked around the forum, and then I gave a talk on it. I went to the first ever Bitcoin conference, and my talk was on contracts, and then a whole lot of people in the following years were like, they would email me and say, I had no idea. And then I watched your video, and now I just quit my job and created a Bitcoin startup because this is the most amazing thing ever. And I'd be like, oh, wow, okay, cool. Definitely the most impactful talk I ever gave.
Yeah.
Of course, most of them weren't my ideas, but it was collecting it all in one place, and I added my own ideas on top, and people were like, wow, you can do this stuff. But it was never really exploited. A few of us did try building apps that use these features, but it was just too hard for people, and a whole bunch of other reasons. So I guess other than unmemeing all this like digital gold nonsense, it would be to reopen people's minds, so you don't need Ethereum to do some of these things. Actually, you can do them on Bitcoin as well.
So it's funny. I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago, and I heard the founder of Counterparty was on stage, and basically they're resurrecting Counterparty. Like, it is back in active development as of the last about a year or so. And they basically went into, all right, hey, we're gonna turn all this stuff back on. If you're sitting on any old tokens and stuff, like, we want everything to be able to turn, like, basically trying to fire it back up, which I thought was really interesting, because he started getting into the fact that like Luke Dash kind of killed our whole business with the stroke of a a GitHub commit and some of these things. But I asked him, I said, do you think it's that different? Like, if you become successful again, and he wants to build this on BTC and the whole thing, and I said, hey, if you start filling blocks with Pepe tokens or whatever again, what do you think stops the core devs from sort of pushing you back out the way they did in 2015 and 16? And he said, oh, they're powerless now. We've already won. We've won that culture war. We're coming back, and we're gonna change the world with Counterparty. So which I thought was maybe a little naive, but I think it was interesting how into it he was. But what do you think of resurrection of those kinds of ideas? I think that's a really good example of simple smart contracts and tokens and some of these things. Do you think that can be successful, or have you paid attention even enough to the culture to know, hey, are these guys going to get nuked again, or what do you think happens if?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know why he's thinking that. As far as I know, nothing has changed. It's a stagnant. The main Bitcoin blockchain is a stagnant system, and you don't even know who controls the website still. So. Sure. I don't know why he thought that, but I presume he has reasons. I wouldn't, wouldn't argue with him about that if he thought it was the case.
Yeah, he seemed to think that the ordinals explosion of the last 18 months or 24 months or so sort of showed that while people tried to resist the onslaught of tokens, that ultimately complaining about them just led to more people being interested in them this time. Whereas last time it was, hey, we're going to shut this down, and they just went away because it was so insular. But this time it actually did sort of make an explosion. My people using Ordinal's wallet and some of these things on BTC, it was similar people like Luke Dash Jr. put out his own node implementation that's going to filter out spam again, and the whole thing. But ultimately, most of the culture laughed at him this time, and people are like, hey man, I'm willing to pay $500 for a transaction to send my token around. But it was kind of an interesting pivot. It reminded me of a few folks like yourself to say like, oh, okay, interesting. They're going to fight back this time, I guess.
Okay, well, more power to them. Let's see if it works.
Yeah. What do you think? We can start to wrap or get into like closing stuff. Where do you think the new horizon is? Because I look at this, I start thinking of Tim Berners-Lee or Tim May and some of these guys that really looked at the internet over the last 20 or 30 years and said, hey, we need a native currency of the internet. We need the internet to be more private, more free, and it's really become this silo of big tech monitoring and big government nonsense. And like, there really are a lot of problems that still need to be solved in the internet, but even just tech in general. Where do you think that kind of stuff is going? Like the AI boom, the crypto bubble, all this stuff. Do you think this stuff consolidates to a big win for like the next phase of human evolution or anything so whimsical as that, or do you think we've made too many bad decisions? Like, what do you think the next decade looks like for us?
Yeah, this is so fascinating. It's such a fascinating topic. So the obvious the obvious next problem that we're going to hit, right, as a sort of society is we have these LLMs and other AI tech which are capable of amazing things, but the that's coming at the expense of two things that have been completely critical in the last 30 or 40 years. One is, people creating content because they want to get something out of it. They create a website, they put some ads on their website, they get some interested readers, and then that's what made it worth it to them. And the second is search. And now what we have is like, if LLMs are searching the internet and reading stuff for you, then no one's seeing the ads. The people who put content out there are getting nothing out of it. And in fact, even the search engine can't fund itself because people don't see ads on the websites nor on the search engines. So at the moment, there's this huge question mark, which is, if we switch to using LLMs to answer our questions, and I mean, I hardly use Google anymore. Why would anyone create new content, right? But we must have people creating content because that's what makes these AIs useful to begin with. And so it strikes me that, the interesting thing about the AI business model is people are proving they're willing to pay for it. So that's one thing. And then you can imagine, some of these lawsuits that are working their way through the system now are turning into, well, maybe you cut the content creators in on the revenue. So you can imagine a totally different internet in future where instead of it being powered by advertising, it's largely powered by micropayments of some kind. And then this kind of loops things back around to like, well, the existing financial system, it has a lot of benefits and a lot of other things, but yeah, like very fast, small, efficient payments is still something it's not great at. Contactless cards are the best. You can do that now. They've driven down the overheads, and they've made micropayments possible basically with contactless cards. Yeah. But if you just want to do it between businesses, that still basically doesn't work. Yeah. So, going forward, there seems to be a gap in the market for someone to say, yeah, we need a way to move small amounts of money around between users, AI companies, and websites, basically. Yeah. You can imagine a future web is like almost entirely. You can imagine like websites in the future would be like almost entirely devoid of visual design. They would be devoid of adverts. They would just be like text, right, and like occasional images, like kind of like the internet goes back in a giant circle to how it looked in 1991.
That's the internet that I started with. Yeah.
It just goes around a giant loop, right? And then, but this time, we end up in websites that look like websites in 1993, but with this financial substrate, which means that when you send your personal agent out to gather information, part of the money is being spread around, and the people are able to monetize that. Yeah. I think that's entirely plausible as a way to go, and no one's even talking about it as far as I know, or maybe they are. No one's really working on it because stuff like Bitcoin has given up on micropayments, and Ethereum also changed the protocols in ways that made it scale much less well. So maybe Teranode can find a niche in something like that where you could resurrect this as a kind of coin for AI companies to distribute the money.
It's funny because that's one of the key things that I think is going to happen. So like my tech futurism penchant is a little bit on like integrated with things like IPv6, and so that you can have payments that are sort of bypassing the current crappy, slow internet problems, having multicast between necessary peers, and then ultimately having like a series of schemas that allow you to bootstrap an internet that is fueled by payments instead of packets, and then that kind of thing. And if we can do that, then essentially do what we're talking about. So the LLMs are over here, the actual content is over here, and then this payment substrate is all sort of integrated, and then that's the world as I see it. I think either we go that direction, or I don't know, or else we're going to have like the Chinese Communist Party in charge of the future of the internet at some point here. So
I think there's if someone like came to me and were like, right, give up all the work you're currently doing, you've got to go work on internet money again, I would probably be looking at ways to integrate micropayments with HTTP such that the act of requesting a web page can be connected to the act of payment. And there's an error code in HTTP that's like payment required or something that nobody 100%. Uses because it just does nothing. Yeah. And then the result might be that it settles up on a peer-to-peer network, or it might be some other mechanism. and yeah, I'd go around like integrating that into web servers and stuff. And I think that there's definitely a gap in the market for something like that today.
I should connect you to, and we can talk about this offline somewhere, but I should connect you to my buddy Siggy. He's working on the really low level stuff that I think someone with your experience, I think you guys would have a great conversation. So I'll make that happen. So and Mike, closing thoughts, anything you want to leave us with? Maybe Satoshi hints or riddles or anything else? What would you like us to go with?
I don't know. I mean, do you want to take some of the live questions? I mean, we've done one, right, from your friend.
I've been kind of reading. I've been letting them inform my own questions a little bit. So
all right, yeah. Okay, that's good. Then they've been summarized, some of those.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a few people mad at me that I didn't put their question up. But
I mean, I suppose, on the topic of Satoshi, the fascinating thing, right, is that he's maybe one of the only people ever who's proven you can make something that becomes worldwide famous and stay hidden, despite God knows how many people have looked for him. And I think that is maybe going forward. I mean, Bitcoin has not taken off as a replacement for regular currencies, but just that legacy might be in the end more impactful than the actual software he built, which is a fascinating idea to me.
I like that very much. Mike, thank you for your time. It's really been excellent. It's been an honor.
No problem.
I've been writing your name and speaking your name in the context of history for about a decade. So it's really nice to finally meet you here. Are you London based? Because I'll be in London in October for a conference. I would love to have you out or buy you a drink or something if possible.
I'm actually living in Switzerland, but I go back to the UK from time to time, to see friends and family. So
sure. All right. Zurich area, perchance?
Yeah, it is Zurich. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I go to Zurich about once a year too, so I'll
let me know when
let you know. Yeah, no, it'd be great to meet up, shake your hand, and I'd love to buy you a drink.
Well, I'm always happy to get beer. So let's do it.
Delightful. Right. Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day.
Yep. All right, everybody. So that was Mike Hearn, one of the first Bitcoin developers, one of Satoshi's really only true friends. Satoshi had a lot of enemies and a few allies. I think Mike was closest thing to a friend. Among the very small group of people that I think could have gone so far as to say that he was a friend. Mike, I think, stuck up for Satoshi in the ways that he deserved to be stuck up for, and that's something I think he can be proud of. So everybody, thank you for watching. It's been a long show, but I think it's been a fun one. If you could share with your friends, like, subscribe, hit the alert bell, let our technocrat overlords know that you prefer our content over the others. Maybe the LLMs will decide that we deserve success in our lives. But everybody, I think if there's one thing that really stands out to me about the whole thing and talking about the Bitcoin civil war and all this stuff, it's that we many times, out of our passions, we fail to be good to each other, and we fail to see each other's humanity and try to solve problems that ultimately benefit us all. And I think if you get past the drama, most of us really just kind of want to do the right thing, whether that's selfish or unpleasant or whatever to some of us based on our values. That's where most of the stuff comes from. And I think looking back, over the last 15 years of Bitcoin drama, I think it's been a big failure to be good to each other from a lot of people that probably mostly wanted to do the best thing for the world as a whole. So everybody, thank you. It's been a delight. I bid you adieu, and we will see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just like every single week for the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. I am Kurt Wilkert Jr. Good day.